I did a video a while back on communication options in general because it covered a lot of things that didn't require electricity at all. But radio is also very complicated, and I think it needs its own video. So this is really focusing on radio-based communication options for grid down situations such as your cellular phones and internet stopping, something like that. Your normal means of communications are out. What are your other options? How can you get your news in on your local area? How can you communicate with your family or team if you are more spread out than just walking around a house? If you're living in multiple houses across the way. And then how could you call for help as well? So we're going to dive in to first with some radio types. These are just like the types of packages that they put radios in. They make many different bands, and that's what we're going to talk about after this. But for the types, this governs more how much power is it going to consume and how easy is it to power. And handhelds they don't consume very much. They're very portable. I love handhelds, but they don't have a lot of power. That's the downside with that. You've also got portable stuff like boom boxes. I don't really recommend those for a grid down. They just too much power consumed, very difficult to power. Vehicles can give you some additional power as they're running off the vehicle. But are you getting fuel to power that vehicle? Do you have another way to power that vehicle for a longer period of time? Those are things to consider with that, but it will give you a lot more power, and a base station is one of the most powerful ones if you can power it. The base station is one of the strongest types of radios, but can be one of the most difficult types to power. If it is required to be connected with the regular wall power, you may be losing some of your energy with an inverter or something like that, or running on a generator that just doesn't have sustainability in a grid down. Once your fuel storage is out, then you lose power to it. There's also specialty radio type systems such as radio spectrum analyzers and software defined radio. Software defined radio works on a computer and uses a computer to modulate the signal and then interfaces with an antenna. So it's using your computer to do some of the functionality of the radio. It gives you a few other little options on there, such as the ability to analyze the spectrum too. There's also custom spectrum analyzers and testers and stuff like that. The radio spectrum analyzer, I did want to mention that specifically though. You can use it to find they generally like to use it to find where there's interference, but it can also be used to find where people are talking and having conversations. If you're trying to find someone to talk to, running a spectrum analyzer can it'll show you spikes on where people are transmitting, which frequency and what power they're transmitting at. And so they would be useful to have if you think you're going to be contacting people that you haven't already given them a frequency that you're going to be trying to find new contacts. It's a great way to make new contacts. Alright, now let's take a look at news bands when we want to find out what's going on out there, because if there is something bad going on, that's when we want to know about the news more than anything else. When the lights go out, that's when I really want to know what's going on. So weather radio is one of them. There are a number of official frequencies that they use. There's 5 main ones. It's channels 1 through 5. That is where I've seen most of those radio frequencies are operating in weather channels 1 through 5. Get a weather radio. They announce regular weather reports, like constantly talking about the weather, just the facts. They just give you the wind speed and the temperature and all that. Sometimes a forecast or something a little bit further on there. It's all weather, and it's also all hazards as well. So whenever they give a emergency broadcast, a flood watch, or someone dangerous in your community, something like that, weather radio, they will oftentimes also mention that hazard as well. Tornadoes in your area, hurricanes coming in, all hazards. Get a weather radio figure out which of those channels has the strongest signal to you. That should be your closest. Now, you can also look up where that channel should be and figure out where they're coming out of, because you do want to be close to you, but generally the strongest one should be the closest to you. There are some exceptions though. Sometimes you might be able to pick up the guy who's the transmitter that's 60 miles away before you can do the one that's 2 miles away. That's rare, but also a lot of times they are operating out of the same field office, so their information is going to be almost identical. They might have some exceptions to that, but for the most part, most of the time if they're operating out of the same office, they got the same information. So that's weather. But there's also AM and FM radios, and there's also shortwave. Shortwave is really good for long distance communication. Sometimes you can pick up other continents with a good shortwave radio. But regular commercial radios like AM, FM, good to have those laying around. But a shortwave radio can really help too. If the power's out in your area and your local AM and FM radio station's out, you might be able to pick something up on shortwave. Amateur radio stations will transmit shortwave, and sometimes I've heard some what sounds like commercial broadcasts on there too. And it can be from a long distance, hundreds of miles that will travel, or even sometimes further. Depends on where they're transmitting from, what type of power they're using, and how good your reception is. That can be very useful. So if the power's out for 100 miles around you, you might still get some radio broadcasts through shortwave when you can't get it through any of the others. Now let's take a look at whenever we want to talk back at whoever we're talking to, right? Whoever's talking to us, we want to talk back to them. Now, MURS and commercial radio, I do not really recommend those as like prepper radios unless they are for within your household, within your group. If that's what you decide to run, then that's great. But I do also question MURS for that as well, because there's only 5 channels, which means as other people are also breaking out their radios, there's a very good chance you won't have a clear frequency. So you might not get your own frequency, as opposed to if you're running CB, on the other hand, there's 40 channels. It is 4 watt maximum, so you have better chances of hearing someone else for further distances, but you have more frequencies that you can hopefully run to as your other frequencies are taken over by everyone breaking out their radios. But CB is also a great radio to have around. I'm going to mention ham on here big time. It's the longest range. It can be the worldwide. I mentioned the shortwave radio transmissions. Amateur radio guys with their ham radios, they can be making those transmissions. You can receive on ham radio just about everything that's on this list with the exception of CB. So you can receive it. Now, legally, you're not supposed to transmit on anything that requires a certification on your radio that you don't have the certification for. Ham radios are not certified as MURS radios or CB radios or any of that other stuff. So while you can listen to MURS on a ham radio, you're not allowed to reply. FRS, GMRS, you can easily listen to them on most ham radios as well. You're not allowed to reply. MURS, CB, FRS do not require any type of license. GMRS and commercial radio require just a fee, and the amateur radio requires a fee and a test. So it depends on what you're after, though. Ham is the strongest as far as being able to access the most through ham and being able to transmit the best. Some of those band plans allow, I've seen 1500 watt allowances, and you know, that's pretty common on some bands. So something to be looked at. You can get a lot of power there, while on the other hand, GMRS is the maximum I can think of on any of the others, except for commercial, which can be 50 watt. Both ham and GMRS can also do repeaters as well. So you can contact another radio station that can repeat that, so that you can reach locations that you wouldn't be able to reach directly. It really opens up doors for a lot better communication. So for longer distance communication, it just depends on what you need. If you're just trying to communicate in your house, maybe just down the street, 2 doors down, FRS might work perfectly. It's anywhere from 2 watts to half a watt, depending on which channel there. GMRS, you can deal with half a watt, 5 watts, 50 watts on the limits, but then again, it depends on your radio. Most handhelds won't transmit at 50 watts. That's where you want your vehicle radio, your base station, to get in there and get those other watts up. They do make vehicle radios that do 50 watts on GMRS. Alright, I think I pretty well mentioned what we need to on here. A bunch of different capabilities. FRS and GMRS, they do operate on the same frequencies. Those 22 channels are shared. GMRS is higher powered and requires a fee, but you need to pay the fee to use GMRS. So that's your communication bands. So find something that's your right type of radio, the right type of band for what you're interested in dealing with. Are you interested in getting licensed and go the whole 9 yards? I'd go ham for sure. CBs have their functionality too. Let's talk about getting and giving help. You want to find frequencies, and that's part of the reason why it doesn't require a license to listen to any frequency. You can listen to anything you want to without a license. And you can, on your ham radio, you can listen to those FRS and GMRS frequencies like I mentioned before that you have. You just can't reply back. It's not allowed to be on that frequency. You're not allowed to reply back. But it's still good to listen to things now, get to know what's out there, find out what you are, find out who's talking where. Find your frequencies now while the grid's up, while you have access to internet databases, while you have, lots of power. You're not working on battery, and you're not trying to use hand crank chargers or solar panels or limited fuel in your generators or vehicle to power your stuff. Right now you've got wall power. Find your frequencies now. Learn what your emergency frequencies are. Learn where conversations are. All that. But also know too, these license restrictions we talked about, they are suspended. It is in the FCC rules. They are suspended if there's a threat to life, property, and there's no other means to communicate. Key thing there, if you've got a perfectly good working phone, don't get on a ham radio. The exception does not apply to you in that case. But if you are losing blood and you need to contact somebody who can hopefully get you help, you can definitely jump on whatever radio is available to try to get help in that case. It's in the rules. Now, I would definitely look at getting a license, even though you won't need a license when there is an emergency to that extent. Take a look at this. If I'm dealing with a band that requires a license to operate on, and I hear someone trying to break in, I'm not going to be as inclined to reply to them until they've made a declaration that they have an emergency. So I may never actually get the memo that, hey, this person needed help. If I have a license, I can chit-chat with them all I want to. So if I hear someone breaking in, I can go ahead and say hi. Now they know they've got somebody. Now even though they're panicking here and they're not thinking about these laws here that might be preventing anyone from replying back, they're just saying, hello, hello. They might not have gotten the help. But if you were licensed and you heard that, you don't have to fall under that restriction. You can go ahead and reply back, give your proper call sign, make a proper call back to them, and what's up? Oh wow, this is a serious emergency here. Let me see if I can get your location and get help to you. And then there you are. So their phone was down, but you were able to get the radio call, and you were able to call emergency services and notify them as to the situation and the location. Alright, let's talk about certain areas too, certain frequencies that we might want to be aware of as well. CB channel 9, that's 27.065 megahertz on your CB radios. That is a reserved emergency frequency channel. Some law enforcement agencies will monitor that channel as well. That's so that way they can give help to you if you do run into an emergency in that area where they're listening. That is a way that you could possibly get, highway patrol or local county or whatever it be, whoever's listening to that may be able to get in touch with you if you break in on CB channel 9. If I do have a situation where I'm thinking that someone's going to be inclined to want to be needing to use a radio in my area for emergencies, CB channel 9 is one that I would be inclined to monitor as well, because then I can hear that call for help and then maybe respond to it. If it just depends on what the situation is, though. If it's a situation where I can't respond, then I can't. But it is an option where I have, if I think that I can help, I'd be inclined to monitor that. Marine Band 16. Marine Band radios are only, we didn't really discuss that because it is reserved for ships. But channel 16, if you are nearby to the ocean and a lost ship or somebody like that is having an emergency, they will be inclined to go to Marine Band 16. That is an international emergency distress frequency. 156.8. Your Baofeng can pick that up just fine. It's on the UA. Most of your amateur radios, amateur handhelds will pick that up. That's on the UHF. No, that's on the VHF frequency band. The 156.8 megahertz. So that would be another one too that I have set up where I can monitor that as well. I'm not really all that close to ocean, but you never know. If a grid down does happen, I'm planning on monitoring 9. I'm planning on monitoring 16, and that means as well I would be inclined as well to watch other radios, because you've got to pay attention to this as well. Some people won't know what type of radio that they have. They might not be a radio expert. They may have just run into a crisis, grabbed whatever radio it was, and they might be thinking it's a CB when it's an FRS or GMRS or whatever else it is. Or they might think they've got the Marine Band radio and they've actually got a CB radio. So monitoring 9 and monitoring 16 on additional bands might not hurt. But if you are trying to call out for help, I would definitely try to get CB9 is probably the biggest one. That's the number one I would try to go to. There's also emergency frequency bands, emergency services bands that you can use in your area, which you can locate and hopefully listen to what's going on. It can give you some news. That's another way to kind of get some news as far as what's going on. In the event of a real crisis where there is no other way, it's got to be really important before I'm going to be into there, before I'm going to try and break into that. But if it's really, I don't have any other way and it is a crisis, that might be an option. Conversations. Anyone who's having a conversation out there, chances are someone is listening, and if they're conversating, that's awesome because they also have the ability to transmit. So that would be a way to get help. Probably one of the best ways. Probably beyond CB9. If you can catch a conversation, that's the way to go, because there's actively people there for sure. Broadcasts, there's oftentimes people listening to broadcasts as well. But it's got to be a real crisis before I start breaking into someone else's broadcast. Someone's, amateur radio show or something like that. But if it is if it is really, really important, that's an option as well. But generally, emergency services, they're not designed for civilians to bridge into. So that's why that would be for me to actually call in on that frequency, it's got to be really important. Now let's take a look and find out how we can find active frequencies in our area. We did talk a little bit about the use of a radio spectrum analyzer. Radio spectrum analyzers only really give you what's happening right now, and if there isn't any activity on there, you might not know that it's a commonly used frequency. Fortunately, there are places like Radio Reference. I like these guys because they give us a map, and they can show us what's going on wherever we are. We can just select our location on the map and get a list of different frequencies that are in use, that are registered for use as, say, emergency services, or sometimes certain corporations or other services will be in here. So you can find your frequencies to load your scanner using internet-based databases as well. Thank you for watching.